Never waste a single second arguing with a narcissist, because while you are still trying to prove that you are right, they have already begun quietly turning every word you say into the very energy that keeps them alive. There is a truth that very few people have ever told you directly. Words are not what make a narcissistic ego tremble. Quite the opposite. Every argument, every explanation, every tear you allow them to see becomes another dose of what they need to continue surviving. The only thing that truly sends them into panic, the only thing capable of cracking the false shell of confidence they have spent years carefully constructing, is silence. Not the silence of someone weak who lowers their head and gives up, but the silence of someone who has learned how to transform stillness itself into their sharpest weapon. Every day, thousands of people fall into the same psychological trap without even realizing it. They scream because they are hurt. They cry because they hope the other person will finally see the pain they are carrying. They spend hours explaining themselves in the hope that if they can only speak clearly enough and sincerely enough, the other person will eventually understand. But no one ever sits them down and tells them that this intense reaction, this visible display of pain, is exactly what is quietly feeding the person who caused it. In behavioral science, every time you react, whether through anger, tears, or even the sharpest contempt you can express, you are unintentionally sending a message to your own nervous system that the person standing in front of you still has the power to shape your emotions. And that is precisely what a narcissistic ego craves more than almost anything else in the world. From the outside, a narcissist often radiates a kind of confidence that seems almost impossible to shake. They walk as though the entire world revolves around them. They speak as though every pair of eyes should naturally be focused in their direction. And it is precisely this image that causes so many people to believe they are facing an impenetrable fortress with no weakness. But the truth behind that hardened exterior is completely different. Deep inside is not a solid foundation, but an extremely fragile core, hauntingly empty, a void that constantly needs to be filled with attention, admiration, or even the fear of other people, because it has never developed the ability to fill itself. This is the greatest secret they never want you to discover. Behind every insult, every manipulation tactic, every moment they make you feel small, there is often nothing more than a desperate attempt to conceal an emptiness they themselves are too afraid to confront. Today, we are going to expose the entire psychological architecture hidden behind that mask of false confidence, and give you 3 completely silent weapons. They require no arguments and no direct confrontation, yet they are powerful enough to strike at the very roots of the ego they have spent their entire life building and protecting. Before we examine each weapon in detail, I want to stop for a moment and talk about something that many of you watching this video have almost certainly experienced. You know what you need to do. You may even be able to recite every psychological concept about toxic relationships from memory. But when the moment of real confrontation arrives, your hands still begin to shake, and your finger still unconsciously drifts toward that old conversation. The distance between knowing what to do and actually being able to do it is where most people remain trapped for years. Not because they are weak, but because no one has ever taken them by the hand and guided them through each specific day. Before we continue, I would like to introduce you to a special book that we created ourselves, titled No Contact: 30 Days to Find Yourself Again. This book will help you understand why you still feel emotionally attached, recognize the triggers that make you want to return, rebuild trust in yourself, and gradually break free from a painful relationship. Inside, you will find 8 in-depth chapters, practical exercises, and a 30-day recovery plan. To get the book, simply click the link in the description below. And now, we will return to the main subject of today's video. The 3 weapons you are about to discover are not empty theories. They are tools you can begin applying today, starting with the first weapon. The first weapon, ice-cold indifference.
The first weapon I want to give you is not a sentence, nor is it a specific action. It is a state of being, a state you will have to practice every day until it becomes instinctive. Absolute indifference, as cold as a frozen lake in the middle of winter, its surface remaining perfectly still no matter how many stones are thrown into it.
To understand why this state can be so devastatingly powerful, you need to picture something clearly. Every provocation, every passive-aggressive remark, every manufactured crisis a narcissist creates does not necessarily come from some random emotional outburst. Instead, it can resemble a repeated experiment in which they introduce a stimulus and then wait, observe, and measure your reaction in order to determine where the power lies in the relationship. This is the essence of what behavioral researchers describe as a feedback loop, a cycle in which your reaction, whether it is anger, tears, or even visible pain on your face, becomes information they can use to refine their next strategy. The more intensely you react, the more clearly they learn which button they need to press in order to control you in the future. And here is the most disturbing part, something very few people have ever explained to you clearly. It does not matter whether your reaction is positive or negative. As long as there is a reaction, they have gained something. Many people believe that if they respond with contempt, or with a cutting remark sharp enough to silence the other person, then they have won. But to an ego built around occupying emotional space inside other people, even your contempt can become a form of supply, because it proves that you are still giving them your time, still giving them your energy, still allowing their existence to matter to you. Real victory is not about how devastating your response can be. It is about refusing to participate in the game at all. So what does this state of ice-cold indifference actually look like in real life? It does not mean gritting your teeth and forcing yourself not to explode while everything inside you is boiling. If you are merely suppressing your reaction, your body will still reveal what is happening. Your eyes may still tremble, your breathing may become faster, and someone with highly developed manipulative instincts may quickly recognize that you are still fighting internally. They may continue escalating until that shell of restraint finally breaks apart. True indifference comes from somewhere much deeper. It comes from genuinely withdrawing your emotional investment from their reactions, to the point where their provocations, no matter how malicious they may be, simply pass through you like a light breeze, leaving nothing significant enough behind to demand a response. There is a psychological phenomenon that can occur when you maintain this state long enough around someone who has manipulative tendencies. We might describe it as a kind of operational freeze. The mind of someone with a strongly narcissistic ego can function largely through constantly locating itself within a hierarchy of power in relation to other people. It depends on continuous feedback signals to determine where it stands, almost like a navigation system that needs satellite signals to know its location. When you stop sending any signal at all, whether positive or negative, that internal navigation system can become completely disoriented. They no longer know whether they are winning or losing. They no longer know whether their strategy is working. And this uncertainty can create a slow, underlying sense of panic that they may rarely experience in other relationships, because most people around them, whether intentionally or unintentionally, continue responding in one way or another. One important thing you need to prepare yourself for is that when you first begin using this weapon, the situation may become worse before it becomes better. This is something many inspirational videos do not tell you, because it is not an easy story to hear. When a manipulative person realizes that their familiar tactics are no longer working, their first response is rarely immediate withdrawal. More often, they escalate. They may try stronger provocations, crueler remarks, and more dramatic situations, all to discover whether there is some level of stimulation powerful enough to break through your wall of indifference. This is often the most difficult stage, the stage where many people give up because they assume their strategy is failing, when in reality, the escalation may be one of the clearest signs that the old strategy is no longer producing the same result. They would have little reason to intensify their tactics if what they were doing before was still working exactly as intended. If you can remain steady through this period of escalation, something begins to change. Their entire system of manipulation, built and refined through dozens or even hundreds of previous interactions with you, suddenly finds itself suspended in empty space with nothing to hold on to. Imagine someone who has become accustomed to punching a soft wall and always receiving a measurable force in return. Now they punch into absolute emptiness. Nothing pushes back. Nothing gives them information. Nothing allows them to adjust their strategy. And it is precisely this absence that can cause their manipulative system to begin collapsing from within. Not because you defeated them in direct confrontation, but because you removed the very foundation that confrontation required in order to survive. But I need to make one thing absolutely clear so that you do not misunderstand this weapon, because this is where many people apply it incorrectly and end up hurting themselves all over again. Ice-cold indifference does not mean becoming emotionally numb. It does not mean closing your heart to everyone around you. And it certainly does not mean pretending that your pain does not exist. Your emotions are still there. They are still real. They still need to be processed. The difference is that you no longer display those emotions in front of the person who caused them. You are still allowed to cry, but you do not need to cry in front of them so they can witness the effect of their words. You are still allowed to feel angry, but that anger can now be processed in your own private space, perhaps through journaling, through talking with a trusted friend, or through physical movement that helps release the energy, rather than being displayed, like a reward, in front of the person who provoked it. There is a practical way to train yourself to develop this state instead of relying on vague willpower alone. First, you need to learn how to recognize the exact moment a provocation appears, rather than allowing it to pass unnoticed until it automatically triggers a reaction inside you. This is the skill of self-observation, and like any muscle, it requires practice. When you notice heat beginning to rise in your chest, when you notice your breathing starting to quicken, that is your first signal. The moment you recognize that signal, you have created an extremely valuable pause, a pause long enough for you to choose your response, instead of allowing your response to choose you. Next, you need to practice keeping your face and body neutral, not by becoming rigid, but through conscious relaxation. Take a deep breath, let your shoulders drop, allow your jaw to loosen instead of clenching. A relaxed body communicates something entirely different from a tense body, even when both are attempting not to react. Someone with sharp manipulative instincts may notice that difference almost immediately. There is one more thing I want you to remember. This state of indifference is not something you need to maintain forever in every relationship in your life. It is a tool designed for a very specific situation. When you are dealing with someone who repeatedly tries to exploit your emotional reactions in order to satisfy their need for control. With people who genuinely love you, people who deserve your sincerity and openness, you neither need nor should use this weapon. The ultimate purpose of this entire journey is not to turn you into someone closed off and cold toward everything around you. It is to help you develop the ability to distinguish clearly between those who deserve access to the openness of your heart and those who should receive nothing but complete silence. When you truly master this first weapon, something remarkable begins to happen, not only in your relationship with the person who hurt you, but in the entire way you understand your own inner strength. You begin to realize that you are no longer a puppet controlled by emotional strings that someone else can pull whenever they choose. You become the person holding those strings yourself. And this is the first and most important transformation that allows you to move forward toward the remaining two weapons. The weapons that will complete the larger picture of self-liberation you are building day by day. The second weapon, nonverbal objective truth. If the first weapon is about controlling your own reactions, the second weapon targets the most dangerous tool a manipulative person possesses. The very tool they use to make you doubt your own memory, your own perception, and even your own reasoning. Psychology refers to this phenomenon as reality distortion, more widely known as gaslighting. Before going deeper into how to use this weapon, I want you to understand why reality distortion is so effective, and why it can cause damage far deeper than outsiders may ever imagine. When someone repeatedly tells you that an event you remember clearly never happened, that words you distinctly heard were never spoken, or that the emotions you are experiencing are excessive or completely irrational, they are not simply lying to you. They are attacking the very foundation you use to understand the world, your ability to trust your own perception. Over time, if this attack continues long enough and happens often enough, many people begin to lose the ability to distinguish between what is true and what has been constructed by the other person. And this is the ultimate objective of reality distortion, because once you stop trusting yourself, you become completely dependent on the version of reality presented by the manipulator. The crucial thing you need to understand is that this mechanism almost always operates through language, through endless arguments, circular explanations, and stories repeated again and again with small details changed each time until your original version becomes increasingly blurred. Precisely because this mechanism survives through language, the most powerful weapon against it is not more language. It is not trying harder to win the argument. It is the exact opposite. You present an objective, concrete reality that cannot easily be distorted, and then you remain silent. Imagine this situation. You are confronted with a false accusation or a distorted version of something that happened between the two of you. The natural instinct for most people is to begin explaining, arguing, and trying to use words to prove that they are right. But this is exactly the trap a manipulative person wants you to fall into, because once the conversation moves into the territory of language and emotion, they can seize control of it. They can redirect the discussion towards something completely different. They can reopen old wounds to distract you. They can transform you from the person who was hurt into the person apologizing within only a few sentences. Language, in the hands of someone skilled at manipulation, is like water. It can be shaped into whatever form is necessary to serve the story they want to tell. But there is something that even the most sophisticated manipulator struggles to bend. Concrete physical evidence with a clear record of when it occurred. A message with a reliable timestamp. An email whose original contents have been preserved. A recording that accurately reflects what was actually said. When you place this evidence in front of them in complete silence, without accusations and without emotional intensity, you create something that the mind of a manipulative person may find extremely difficult to process. You create a direct collision between an objective reality that cannot easily be denied and the self-protecting illusion they have spent so much effort constructing. This is where a profound psychological process can begin, something we might describe as extreme cognitive friction. The human mind, regardless of how manipulative a person may be, still requires some degree of internal consistency in order to maintain a stable sense of self. When someone repeats a false narrative for long enough, at some level, they may begin to believe their own version, because believing it allows them to avoid confronting the possibility that they were the person who caused the harm. When you present objective evidence that cannot easily be dismissed, you force that mind to process two completely contradictory realities at the same time. There is the clear evidence directly in front of them, and there is the story they have persuaded themselves to believe. This contradiction creates a form of cognitive tension that no verbal argument could produce in quite the same way. What I especially want you to notice is that the effectiveness of this weapon depends almost entirely on your ability to remain silent after presenting the evidence. If you show the evidence and then immediately follow it with a long series of accusations or explanations about how deeply their behavior hurt you, you unintentionally reopen the verbal doorway you had just closed. A manipulative person may immediately seize that opportunity to redirect the conversation, shifting attention away from the objective evidence and toward your emotions, which they can more easily criticize, mock, or distort into something supposedly excessive. The real power lies in placing the truth in front of them and allowing it to speak for itself, without needing emotional reinforcement or additional explanation from you. There is another important point that needs to be addressed. When a manipulative person is confronted with a reality that is difficult to deny, their most common response is rarely sincere remorse. Do not expect a dramatic moment in which they look at the evidence, burst into tears, and apologize for all the pain they have caused you. A far more common response is panic disguised in different forms. It may appear as sudden and uncomfortable silence. It may emerge as an explosion of anger designed to redirect attention. They may abruptly leave the conversation for a reason that has nothing to do with what is being discussed. Although these reactions may look very different on the surface, they can arise from the same underlying source, a temporary breakdown in the defense mechanisms they have relied upon for so long to preserve the image of themselves they want to believe. I also need to be very clear about an important limitation of this weapon, so that you do not develop unrealistic expectations. Nonverbal objective truth cannot transform a deeply manipulative person into someone who suddenly knows how to listen, admit wrongdoing, and create lasting behavioral change. The purpose of this weapon is not to reform them, because genuine change can only come from a person's own internal desire to change, something you can never force from the outside. The true purpose of this weapon is for you. It is meant to free you from constantly doubting your own memory and perception. It gives you something solid to stand on, a reality you can trust completely no matter how aggressively the other person attempts to distort it. This is also why documenting important events and preserving messages or other evidence with clear records of when things happened is not necessarily an act of paranoia or preparation for war. It can be an act of protecting your own mind. When you possess objective evidence, you no longer have to rely entirely on fragile memory, something that can gradually become worn down under the constant pressure of repeated distortion, in order to know that what you experienced was real. This becomes the foundation upon which you can rebuild trust in yourself, a trust that may have been severely eroded after living for a long time in a relationship where reality was repeatedly bent according to someone else's wishes. When you become skilled at using this second weapon, you are not merely protecting yourself from meaningless arguments. You are reclaiming the most precious thing a toxic relationship may have tried to take from you, the right to trust your own reality. And once you reclaim that right, no lie, no matter how sophisticated it may be, can so easily make you doubt yourself again. The third weapon, absolute non-performative freedom. We have already gone through the first two weapons. One helps you stop being a source of emotional supply for them. The other helps you stop being pulled into arguments that distort reality. But the third weapon, the final one, is the most decisive of all, because it is not merely a response to their behavior. It is an entirely new way of living. A way of living in which their existence no longer occupies any space in your mind, whether that space is filled with hatred, pain, or even the desire to feel victorious. Before talking about this weapon, I want you to understand the phase that often occurs immediately before it begins to take effect. Because if you are not mentally prepared for it, you can easily be pulled back into the old cycle at the most critical moment. When a person with manipulative tendencies realizes that they have completely lost their ability to control your emotions, that their provocations no longer work, and that their attempts to distort reality have been neutralized, their next response is rarely to simply accept the loss and let you go. Instead, they may switch to an entirely different strategy, a tactic commonly known in psychology as hoovering, in which they suddenly change their behavior completely, moving from hostility to sweetness, from coldness to pleading, all in an attempt to pull you back into the old orbit through a different path. Imagine how this might look in real life. After many weeks, perhaps even many months of complete silence, you suddenly receive a nostalgic message about the beautiful memories the two of you once shared. Or perhaps there is a missed call in the middle of the night with no message attached. Or perhaps a social media post appears at exactly the time they know you are likely to see it, filled with hidden references that only the two of you would understand. All of these actions can be designed, consciously or unconsciously, to awaken your curiosity, to make you wonder whether they have changed, whether something is happening that you need to know about. And the very moment curiosity appears inside you, even for only a few seconds, a tiny opening can form through which they may attempt to enter your life again. This is precisely when the third weapon must be activated with its full strength: absolute non-performative freedom. This phrase contains two equally important parts, and I want to take the time to explain each of them clearly, because if you understand only half of it, this weapon will never reach its full potential. The first part, absolute freedom, means completely cutting off every channel of contact, with no exceptions and no seemingly reasonable excuse persuasive enough to make you violate that boundary. This includes not checking their profile, not following what they are posting, not asking mutual friends how they are doing, and most importantly, not responding to any signal they send, no matter how subtle or tempting it may seem. This is the part most people hear and immediately agree with. Yet it is also one of the hardest parts to carry out in real life, because curiosity about the life of someone who once held an important place in your world is an entirely natural human instinct. It is not a sign of weakness. The second part, and this is the part that many videos and articles about this subject often overlook, is the non-performative element. You may completely cut off contact, but if, deep inside, the process of rebuilding your life is still being performed for an imaginary audience in your mind, if you are still wondering whether they will see this photograph, whether they will hear about that achievement, whether they will regret losing you when they see how happy you have become, then psychologically, you are not completely free yet. You have simply moved from one form of connection into another, one that is subtler and harder to recognize, but one that still keeps them at the center of the story of your life. True freedom appears only when you begin building your life without any imaginary audience in your mind. When you pursue goals, relationships, and new experiences entirely because they bring meaning to you, not because they might create an impressive image if the other person happens to see them. This is a subtle but decisive transformation, and I want you to understand that it does not happen overnight. It is the result of a continuous process of practice, in which you gradually learn to direct your attention toward your present experience, toward the genuine feeling of joy itself, rather than toward imagining the reaction of someone who is no longer present in your life. Psychologically, this is what happens when you reach a state of non-performative freedom. You remove the remaining forms of supply that a narcissistic ego may seek: attention, validation, and most importantly, the feeling that they still have influence over your life, even though they are no longer physically present in it. A manipulative person may be able to tolerate the fact that you hate them. They may even derive a strange sense of significance from it, because hatred is still a form of attention. It still confirms that they occupy an important place in your emotional world. But what can be far more difficult for them to tolerate is genuine and complete indifference, the reality of you living a fulfilling life, continuing to grow, experiencing genuine happiness, while their existence occupies no meaningful space within it, neither the space of love nor the space of hatred. There is an image I want you to keep in your mind, so that you can better understand the power of this weapon. Imagine someone walking along a road, flooded with sunlight, surrounded by vast open nature, never turning around to look behind them. Not because they are deliberately trying to appear strong, but simply because the thought of looking back no longer occurs to them. Their mind is completely focused on what lies ahead, on everything waiting farther down the road. That is the image of true freedom. It is not freedom performed as a show designed to prove something to someone else. It is freedom that exists quietly and authentically, requiring no audience and no validation from the person who once hurt you. I also want to tell you about an important milestone that you may recognize when you have genuinely reached this state. It is the moment when you hear some news about them, perhaps through a mutual friend or through some random coincidence, and you realize that your emotional response is almost neutral. You do not feel satisfaction if the news is bad, and you do not feel wounded if the news suggests that they are doing well. This is not a sign that you have become emotionally numb. It is one of the clearest signs that you have fully reclaimed control over your own emotional state, a form of control that was once tied closely to whatever happened in someone else's life. The path toward this state of absolute freedom is not easy, and I do not want to promise you that it will arrive quickly after only a few days of determination. There will be moments when you feel as though you have come incredibly far, only for some small event, a song, a familiar place, or a story you happen to hear, to pull you back into old emotions for a few minutes or even a few hours. What matters is not whether you ever experience those moments of regression. What matters is whether you continue walking toward that sunlit road, even when your steps occasionally slow down, even when they sometimes tremble. When you truly possess all three of these weapons, ice-cold indifference removes the emotional supply they once drew from your reactions. Non-verbal objective truth neutralizes their ability to distort reality, and absolute non-performative freedom takes away whatever remaining power they may believe they still hold inside your mind. At that point, you are no longer merely protecting yourself from one particular person. You are rebuilding the entire foundation of who you are, creating a foundation so strong that no words and no manipulation tactic, no matter how subtle or sophisticated, can shake it again. Remember this clearly. Your goal was never to hurt them. Your goal was simply to prevent them from ever hurting you again. The three weapons you have just heard about are not tools for revenge. They are doors leading you back to yourself, to the version of you that existed long before they entered your life, and that will continue to shine more brightly than ever after they are gone. There is a truth that very few people dare to say out loud. You do not need to witness their suffering in order to find peace. Because the greatest freedom a human being can achieve is the moment when your happiness no longer depends on the fate of the person who once hurt you, whether that fate turns out to be fortunate or painful. Your worth was never measured by the way they treated you, and it will never be defined by whether they eventually recognize their mistakes. Many people spend entire years waiting for an apology that never comes, waiting for the moment when the other person finally breaks down and admits to all the pain they caused. But that waiting only keeps placing the power to determine your happiness in the hands of someone who has already proven that they do not deserve to hold that power. The three silent weapons are not meant to force them to fall to their knees and admit that they were wrong. They exist so that you no longer need them to do so. The silence you choose is not weakness. It is one of the most mature languages a wounded person can ever learn. A language that says you have become strong enough to no longer need to prove anything to anyone. including the very person who once made you question your own worth. Every morning you wake up and they are no longer the first person on your mind. Every time you genuinely laugh without an imaginary audience watching in your head. Every boundary you continue to protect even while your heart still carries scars that have not completely healed. All of these are signs that you are winning. Not winning against them, but overcoming the weaker version of yourself that existed yesterday. Before we close today's video, I want to ask you one question. Of the 3 silent weapons we have just discussed, which one have you already used without even realizing it? Or are you standing at the threshold of using one of them for the very first time? Leave your answer in the comments. Your story may be exactly what a stranger needs to read tonight, in order to find just a little more courage to keep moving forward. If this video brought value to you, subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next practical psychology lessons on your journey back to yourself. Thank you for staying with me until the very final moments. I wish you a week filled with peace and filled with freedom.